What can I say about myself? I am the lawyer who has not lost a single case in 10 years, no matter what the cost. But this time the cost was so high that I almost lost myself. But let's not rush. Everything in order. My name is Mikhail Orlov. I am 38 years old, and I am the most successful criminal defense attorney in New York. 127 consecutive wins, not a single loss. When people hear my name in a courtroom, prosecutors already know they are going to have to sweat. On that October day in 2025, I sat in my office on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, celebrating another victory. A drug case. The client should have gotten life in prison, but instead got probation. As always, I found the weak link in the prosecution's chain of command and tore it to shreds. Mr. Orlov, my assistant Anna came in with a folder of documents. You have a new client, a very serious matter. How serious? Federal indictment for financial fraud, $50 million. I raised an eyebrow. A large sum, but not the largest I've ever dealt with. Who is the client? Viktor Krasin, owner of an investment fund, accused of creating a financial pyramid. And who is the prosecutor? Daniel Black. Now I was wary. Daniel Black was a legend in the federal prosecution. 89% conviction rate, an expert in economic crimes. If he was taking on a case, the evidence was rock solid. When is the meeting with the client? In 1 hour. Viktor Krasin turned out to be a typical middle-aged rich man. An expensive suit, a gold watch, a brazen confidence that money solves everything. But in his eyes, I saw fear. The real, animal fear of a man who understands that he can lose everything. Mr. Orlov, he said, sitting down in the chair opposite my desk. I need the best lawyer in town. They say it's you. They say it right. But first tell me the truth, the whole truth. What truth? That you really did create a pyramid scheme, that you stole $50 million from investors, that the evidence against you is irrefutable. Krasin turned pale. How do you know? Because I've studied the case file, and because Daniel Black doesn't take cases he can lose. So everything is lost? Not all of them. I have plans A, B, C, and D. One of them will work. I lied, of course. After studying the case, I realized that this was the most difficult case in my career. The evidence is irrefutable. The witnesses are reliable. The documents are genuine. A classic case when guilt is obvious even to a blind man. But I couldn't afford to lose. My reputation, my business, my life, everything was built on me always winning. Always. What is your fee? Asked Krasin. $2 million in advance plus $5 million in case of acquittal. $7 million? For one case? For the impossible, for a miracle. He agreed. He signed the contract, transferred the money, and I was left alone with the understanding that I had taken on a case that could ruin my career. I spent the next 2 weeks studying every piece of paper, every deposition, every piece of evidence. I looked for procedural irregularities, weaknesses in witness testimony, any clue that might sow doubt in the minds of the jury. The result was dismal. Daniel Black had done a flawless job. No procedural errors, all evidence obtained legally, witnesses briefed and ready for cross-examination. Anna, I called to my assistant, find me everything about Daniel Black, his weaknesses, his habits, his personal life, everything. Mr. Orlov, this is not entirely ethical. Ethics is a luxury I cannot afford. A week later, I had the full picture. Daniel Black, 41, divorced, no children, lives alone in an apartment on the Upper East Side, a workaholic who spends 16 hours a day in the office, no hobbies, no friends, no romantic relationship since his divorce 3 years ago, a loner, just like me, by the way. The first meeting in court took place at the preliminary hearing. I saw Daniel for the first time in my life, and I must admit, he made an impression. Tall, gray-haired, with intelligent gray eyes and confident movements. He spoke clearly, argued logically, and held himself with the dignity of a true professional. And he was handsome, not in the Hollywood sense, but in the sense that mature men with character and intelligence are handsome. Your Honor, he told the judge, the evidence clearly points to the defendant's guilt. We have documentary evidence of a financial scheme designed to defraud investors. I listened to him and understood that I was in front of a real professional, the same as me, only on the other side of the barricades. Mr. Orlov, the judge turned to me. Your objections. Your Honor, the prosecution is based on circumstantial evidence and assumptions. My client is prepared to prove his innocence. A lie, of course. We had no evidence of innocence, but we had to play the role to the end. After the hearing, Daniel and I ran into each other in the courtroom corridor. He approached me with his hand outstretched. Mr. Orlov? Daniel Black, I've heard about your successes. Likewise, I replied, shaking his hand. A firm handshake, confident. Get ready for a serious fight. Always ready, he smiled. But this time the victory will be mine. We'll see. His eyes lingered on my face a little longer than politeness required, and I felt something strange, as if he were assessing me not only as an opponent, but as a man. That evening, I sat in my office pondering my defense strategy. All traditional methods had been exhausted. The evidence was irrefutable, the witnesses were reliable, and procedures were followed. There was only one way left, unconventional, risky, bordering on unethical. I had to find a way to influence Daniel Black personally, find his weak spot, and put pressure on it. And after today's meeting, I had a suspicion that I knew what this weak spot might be. Daniel Black was lonely. He was a professional who had dedicated his life to his career, and perhaps he experienced the same type of loneliness that I did. Maybe I should have tried a more personal approach. Get to know him better, find common ground, get closer. The idea was crazy, unethical, risky, but I was ready to do anything to win. I always was. And if the price of winning this case turns out to be higher than I've ever paid, well, let's see if I can afford it. I spent the next 3 weeks in total war preparation mode. My office became a military headquarters, the walls covered with charts, documents, photographs of witnesses. I studied every detail of the case, every comma in the testimony, every date on the financial reports. The result was depressing. Daniel Black worked like a true professional. The prosecution scheme was logical. The evidence was collected methodically. The witnesses were prepared perfectly. Anna, I called to my assistant once again. What's the news on Martin Stone? Martin Stone was the prosecution's key witness, a former partner of Crayson who agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony is devastating to our case, Anna replied, leafing through the documents. He claims to have been personally present when the scheme to defraud investors was planned. Is there anything incriminating about him? Nothing serious? Parking tickets, one divorce, alcohol addiction in the past? That's not enough to discredit his testimony. I leaned back in my chair, feeling despair creeping in. I had never encountered such a cast-iron case in my entire career. And what do we have about Black himself? I asked. The full file is ready. Anna placed a thick folder in front of me. Daniel Black, 41, graduated from Harvard Law School with honors. 15 years in the federal prosecutor's office, specializing in economic crimes. I opened the folder and started to study it. Photos, biography, to-do list, personal information, marital status. Divorced 3 years ago. Wife filed for divorce, citing emotional neglect and workaholism. No children. Romantic relationships after divorce? No information about serious relationships. Colleagues describe him as a loner, completely absorbed in his work. I studied the photos carefully. Daniel at events, in court, in the office. Always alone, always focused, always professional. Hobbies, interests? Reads professional literature, goes to the gym 3 times a week, lives in an apartment on the Upper East Side. Friends? Only work contacts. I have practically no personal friends. The picture that emerged was sad. A successful, lonely man who devoted his life to his career and was left without personal attachments. A story that was painfully familiar to me. Anna, is there any information about his preferences? In what sense? On a personal level. Orientation, the type of women he likes. Mr. Orloff, this is a rather delicate topic. Find it at any cost. 2 days later, I had more information, and it was more interesting than I expected. Mr. Orloff, Anna said, entering the office with a mysterious expression on her face. I have something on Black. Spill it. I talked to the bartender at the bar near his house. Daniel sometimes goes there for a drink after work. Always alone, never tries to meet women. And the bartender noted something odd. Daniel often sits in a position to watch certain men at the bar. Young professionals, well-dressed. Interesting. Very interesting. What else? His ex-wife, in an interview for divorce proceedings, mentioned that he never had a normal, physical interest in her. Said that she felt like a roommate, not a wife. The pieces began to fall into place. Daniel Black may have been a closeted homosexual, or at the very least, questioning his sexuality. This could be his weak point. At the next preliminary hearing, I watched Daniel more closely. How he moved, how he looked, how he reacted to the people around him. Your Honor, he said, introducing another piece of evidence, the financial records clearly show the flow of funds from investors to the defendant's personal accounts. His voice was confident, his arguments clear, but I noticed how he was watching me out of the corner of his eye. Not the way one usually watches an opponent in court, but the way a man watches another man he is interested in. After the meeting, I deliberately stayed behind, collecting documents. Daniel was in no hurry to leave either. "Mr. Orlov," he approached me. "Good work today. Your objections were creative." "Thank you. You did a professional job, too." "You know," he said, lowering his voice, "even though we are opponents, I admire your skill. Your reputation is well-deserved. Likewise, you have created a strong business. Maybe we can have lunch sometime? We'll discuss the legal profession and share experiences." The offer was unexpected and promising. "With pleasure," I replied. "But not until this matter is over. Ethical considerations, you understand." "Of course." After the trial, his eyes lingered on my face again longer than necessary, and I realized my hypothesis was correct. In the evening, I was sitting in the office planning a strategy. Traditional legal tactics did not work. It remained to try a personal approach. The plan was risky and unethical, but it might be the only way to win this case. I had to get close to Daniel Black, find a way to influence him personally, and if my suspicions about his hidden orientation are correct, I have the tool of influence. The problem was that I had never tried to seduce a man before, and I wasn't sure I could do it convincingly. But to win, I was ready to try everything. "Anna," I called to my assistant the next day, "find out where Daniel Black holds his evenings. What restaurants, bars, places. Why do you need this?" "I want to run into him by chance. An informal conversation can provide useful information." She looked at me suspiciously, but said nothing. A day later, I had the information I needed. Daniel often dined at Sydney's restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, usually alone, usually at a table by the window, usually with work. Perfect. On Wednesday evening, I arrived at Sydney. Daniel was sitting exactly where I expected him to be, by the window with a folder of documents and a laptop. I approached his table with the most innocent look. "Daniel? What a coincidence." He looked up and smiled in surprise. "Mikhail, what are you doing here?" "Having dinner after work, one of my favorite places." "And you?" "Same thing. You know, there's great food here and a quiet atmosphere to work. Mind if I join you? I don't feel like having dinner alone." He hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Sure, sit down." I sat down opposite him, ordered wine, and started a casual conversation about the restaurant, the weather, and work at general. "Is it hard being a federal prosecutor?" I asked. "Sometime, especially when there are high-profile cases, media attention, political pressure." "I understand. I have similar problems with high-profile defense cases. We are probably one of the few people who understand this stress." "Exactly. Most people don't understand what it means to be responsible for someone's freedom or future." Conversation flows naturally. Daniel proved to be intelligent, articulate, and surprisingly open once he relaxed. "Do you have a family?" he asked at one point. "Number career always came first, and you?" "Was married, divorced 3 years ago." "Regret." "Not worth it. We just turned out to be incompatible. She wanted a husband who comes home by 6 p.m. and you are dedicated to your work." "Exactly. Loneliness, the price of success?" "It seems so." He looked into my eyes. "And you? Never married?" "A couple of serious relationships, but nothing lasted. It's hard to find someone who understands the demands of this profession and the needs of a person who lives in a world of constant competition." "You get it." We talked for another hour, and I saw how he looked at me, with an interest that went beyond professional courtesy. "Mikhail," he said as we were about to leave, "it was a pleasant evening. Perhaps we can repeat it sometime?" "Of course, after our business is over." "After the trial," he agreed, but his eyes said that he didn't want to wait. Driving home, I realized that my plan was starting to work. Daniel Black was interested in me as a man, not just as a legal opponent. Now I had to decide how far I was willing to go to win this case. The main hearing was scheduled to begin on Monday. I spent Sunday evening in the office making final preparations for the trial, but frankly, traditional preparation seemed useless. I had no real defense against Daniel's charges. There was only one plan left. Risky, unethical, but perhaps the only one. At 7 in the evening, I went to the Plaza Hotel, where I was staying during the trial. I knew that Daniel also often dined there. It was convenient, close to the courthouse, and most importantly, neutral territory where we could accidentally meet. The hotel bar was half empty. Quiet jazz was playing in the background. I ordered a whiskey and sat at the counter, waiting. Half an hour later, Daniel appeared, looking tired after a long day of preparation, but still impeccably dressed in a dark suit. "Mikhail?" He raised an eyebrow in surprise when he saw me. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm surprised too. Apparently, we both prefer the same places for relaxation before important days." Mind if I join? He pointed to the next chair. Certainly. He ordered a scotch and sat down next to me, close enough that I could feel his cologne. Expensive, masculine, subtle. Nervous about tomorrow? He asked. Always a little. And you? Also. Regardless of experience, every task is important, especially when the stakes are so high. Your client is looking at a potential life sentence. My reputation is also at stake. We drank in silence, each thinking about tomorrow's battle. Daniel, I said after the second round, can I ask a personal question? Shoot. Have you ever regretted choosing this profession? He thought about the answer for a long time. Sometimes, when I realized that I missed out on normal life, family, relationships, simple human connections. The price of success? Exactly. And you? Regrets? Many. But I don't want to think about them tonight. What do you want to think about? The question sounded softer than usual, with a hint of something personal. That tomorrow, we will be enemies in the courtroom, but tonight we are just two lonely men who understand each other. That's surprisingly honest. Alcohol makes me honest. He smiled, the first real smile I saw from him. Me too. Daniel, I have a confession. What? I didn't come here by chance. I knew that you come here often. Why? Because I wanted to spend time with you as a person, not as a prosecutor. He looked into my eyes, studying my face. And why would you want that? Because I'm interested in you, as a person. Moment of silence. Tension in the air has become almost physical. Mikhail, he said quietly, what do you propose? Dinner, conversation, chance to get to know each other better before we try to destroy each other professionally tomorrow. That's complicated. The best things in life usually are. He finished his scotch, clearly struggling with an internal conflict. One dinner, he finally agreed, but this remains between us. Certainly. We went up to the hotel restaurant, private table in the corner, candles, soft lighting, more intimate than I expected. Tell me about yourself, I asked when the wine arrived. Real you, not prosecutor. There's not much difference. Work is my life. But what was before that? Dreams, aspirations. I wanted to be a writer when I was young. Fiction, maybe journalism. What changed? Reality. Need for stable income, family pressure, understanding that law is more practical. Do you miss it? Creative side? Sometimes, especially when I read a good book or see a well-written argument in court. The conversation became more personal, intimate. He talked about childhood in a small town, about the pressure to succeed, about the loneliness success brings. What about marriage, I asked. What went wrong? Honestly, never felt a real connection. Sarah was a good woman, but there was no passion, physical or emotional. Understand. Are you ever been married? Couple of long relationships with women, but something was always missing. What was missing? Good question. What was missing? Understanding, I guess. None of them understood what drives me, what makes me tick. And what does drive you? Challenge, competition, need to win. At any cost? Direct question. Loaded question. Depends on stakes, I answered honestly. And what are the stakes now? Everything. My reputation, my career, my sense of self. Is that worth compromising for? Another loaded question. We both understood that we were talking about more than just legal ethics. That depends, I said, on what kind of compromise we're discussing. Pause. Long pause while we looked into each other's eyes. Mikhail, he said quietly, I think we both understand what's happening here. And what is happening? Connection, attraction, something neither of us expected. And what are we going to do about it? I don't know. This is new territory for me. For me too. But I can't stop thinking about it. About what? About you. About what it would be like. He didn't finish sentence, but didn't need to. Daniel, I said softly, we have a choice. We can pretend this conversation never happened, go to court tomorrow as professional enemies. Or we can be honest about how we feel. And what do you feel? Attraction, curiosity, desire to know you better. Even though tomorrow we will be trying to destroy each other, maybe because of that. Maybe it adds intensity. He finished his wine, clearly struggling with the decision. My room is upstairs, he finally said. I know. That's not an invitation, that's just statement of fact. I understand. But if you wanted to continue the conversation, somewhere more private, I would like that. The elevator ride was silent, the tension thick. We both knew we were crossing the line, but neither wanted to stop. His room was elegant suite, city lights through large windows, king bed dominated space. Drink, he suggested. Please. He poured whiskey, shaking his hands slightly. First sign nervousness I'd seen from him. Daniel, I said, stepping closer. We don't have to do anything. We can just talk. I know, but I don't want to just talk. What do you want? To stop thinking, to stop analyzing, to just feel something real. Even if this complicates everything, especially if it complicates everything. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel his breath. "I've never," he began. "Neither have I, not like this. What if we regret this tomorrow? What if we regret not doing this?" He kissed me then, soft, hesitant, like he wasn't sure how. I kissed back, and suddenly tentative became urgent, desperate. Afterward, we lay in bed, not touching, both staring at the ceiling. "Well," he said finally, "that happened. Yes. Any regrets? Ask me tomorrow. Fair enough. Daniel? Yes? What does this mean for trial? I don't know. I can't promise anything will change. I'm not asking for promises, just understanding. Understanding what? What was real tonight, whatever happens in court. It was real," he agreed. Very real. Morning came too soon. Awkward dressing, polite conversation, careful avoidance of discussing what happened. "See you in court," he said as we prepared to leave. "See you there." But something had changed. In his eyes, in the way he looked at me. Whether that would translate into courtroom advantage, I didn't know. But as I walked into the federal courthouse that Monday morning, I felt different, more confident, like I had secret weapon. Question was, would I be able to use it? On Monday morning, Daniel and I sat in the courtroom as if nothing had happened. He at the prosecution table in his impeccable suit, I at the defense table in mine. Professional distance, cold glances, no sign of the closeness of the day before, but I felt the difference. In the way he avoided direct eye contact, in the way his voice sounded slightly less confident when he addressed the court, in the way his hands shook ever so slightly as he leafed through documents. "The case of the United States against Victor Crayson is now declared open," Judge Harrison announced. "The prosecution may present its opening statement." Daniel stood up and walked up to the podium, but his usual confidence was gone. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began. "The case before us today involves one of the largest financial frauds in the history of this county." I listened to his speech and realized that something had changed. His arguments were correct, the facts were accurate, but the passion was gone. He spoke like a man who was doing his job, not like a prosecutor who believed in the rightness of his cause. When my turn came, I stood up confidently. "Your Honor, members of the jury, the prosecution wants to present you with a story about a villain and victims, but the real story is much more complicated." I spoke passionately, persuasively, using every opportunity to create reasonable doubt, and I saw Daniel listening to me with the expression of a man who knows he is losing. The first day of the trial went better than I expected. Several prosecution witnesses testified, but I managed to undermine their credibility through cross-examination. Daniel did not object as aggressively as usual. During the break, we accidentally bumped into each other in the corridor. "Good work today," he said quietly. "Thank you, you too." "Mikhail," he began, then stopped. "What? It's okay, see you tomorrow." But in his eyes I saw a conflict, internal struggle between professional duty and what happened between us. The second day began with the testimony of Martin Stone, the prosecution's key witness. His testimony was devastating for my client. "Victor Crayson personally told me," Stone said, "that new investors are needed only to pay interest to the old ones. A classic Ponzi scheme." I tried to discredit him on cross-examination, but Daniel had prepared the witness well. Every attack I made was met with a solid defense. By the end of the day, things were looking bad. Jury was clearly impressed by Stone's testimony. My client was beginning to panic. "Mr. Orloff," Crayson whispered during a break, "what's going on? You said you could handle it." "Everything is under control," I lied. "Tomorrow is the turning point." But honestly, I didn't know what to do. Traditional defense tactics weren't working, and my personal influence on Daniel was insufficient for a serious change in his strategy. The third day was to be decisive. The prosecution would present its final evidence, and then I would begin my defense. Daniel seemed more confident today. Maybe he overcame his inner doubts and decided to play by the rules. "Your Honor," he said, presenting financial records, "these documents prove beyond reasonable doubt that the defendant created an elaborate scheme to defraud investors." His voice was strong, his arguments compelling. Jury listened attentively, and I could see that they were convinced. Around noon, the judge called recess for lunch. I sat in the courtroom, staring at the evidence table, knowing I was losing the case. For the first time in my 10-year career, I was looking defeat in the face. "Anna," I said to the assistant, "I need to go to the bathroom. If anything happens, I'll be back in 5 minutes." The men's room in the courthouse was empty. Everyone was either at lunch or in the courtrooms. I stood at the sink, looking at my reflection and trying to find one last way to save the case. The door opened and Daniel walked in. "Michael," he said, "thought I'll find you here." "Daniel, tough day?" You know what, Tough? He came closer and checked that we were alone. Listen, he said quietly. About that night, what about her? I enjoyed it. More than I expected. My heart started beating faster. And I've been thinking about what we could have, about the connection we felt. Daniel, what do you suggest? One more time. Tonight. And I promise, tomorrow the case will be closed in your favor. Direct offer. Quid pro quo. Sex for verdict. Are you serious? Dead serious. Meet me tonight and tomorrow I will find a way to dismiss charges. I stared at him, realizing that he's offering exactly what I need. Victory. But the price? Here? I asked. Now? Why not? Everyone is at lunch. We have privacy. Daniel, this is crazy. Everything we do is crazy, but it works. He stepped into one of the stalls, the left door open. The invitation was clear. I looked at myself in the mirror. Moment of truth. Cross this line, and there's no going back. Refuse, and I lose everything. But victory was so close, so fucking close. Fuck it, I muttered, and followed him into the stall. 10 minutes later, we were straightening ties, combing hair, pretending like nothing happened. No need for tonight, Daniel said, washing his hands. This was enough. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you win. I'll find technical grounds for dismissal. Guaranteed? Guaranteed. We returned to courtroom separately. Afternoon session began, but I barely paid attention. My mind was on what just happened, on what I'd done. On returning from lunch, Daniel looked different, distant, almost reluctant. As he presented the closing evidence, his heart clearly wasn't in it. Your Honor, he said during the presentation of the final piece of evidence, the prosecution would like to request a brief recess to review some procedural questions. Granted, court will reconvene at 1 o'clock. During the recess, Daniel disappeared. When the court resumed, he returned with a grim expression. Your Honor, he announced, after a careful review, the prosecution has discovered certain irregularities in the evidence collection process. We are compelled to request dismissal of certain charges due to procedural violations. Judge looked surprised but nodded. Which charges? Major fraud charges, Your Honor. Defendant may plead to lesser charges if agrees. My client was ecstatic. Lesser charges meant minimal sentence instead of life imprisonment. Your Honor, I said, standing up. Defense accepts plea arrangement. Very well. Case dismissed for major charges. Victory, complete, total victory. In the corridor after the trial, Crayson practically kissed my feet. Mr. Orloff, you're a genius. How did you do it? Professional secret, I replied. Media crowded around, cameras flashing, microphones shoved into my face. Mr. Orlov, another brilliant victory. What's your secret? Hard work and dedication to justice, I lied, smooth as silk. But inside I felt empty. Victory achieved, but at what cost? Watching Daniel pack his briefcase across the hallway, avoiding eye contact, I realized that I'd won battle but lost something essential. My integrity, my self-respect, my soul. Price of victory had been higher than I ever imagined paying. And the worst part? Knowing that I'd do it again if needed. Because winning was everything. The next 2 days were a triumph. The media called me a genius of legal defense. Colleagues congratulated me on my brilliant victory. New clients lined up. Crayson transferred a bonus of $5 million and recommended me to all his rich friends. Mr. Orloff, said the Legal Times journalist, how did you manage to get dismissal charges in a case that seemed hopeless? Careful preparation and attention to procedural details, I replied with a practiced smile. The devil is always in the details. What fucking irony. The devil really was in the details, and he looked exactly like me. Everyone in the office was celebrating. Anna brought champagne. Junior associates looked at me like a hero, but I felt like a fraud. Mr. Orloff, said Anna, you already have 5 new clients who want consultation. Apparently your reputation is now legendary. Great. Schedule meetings for next week. But even as I said this, I knew something had fundamentally changed in me. Victory didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a betrayal of myself. That evening, I sat in my penthouse apartment, looking at the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows and trying to understand what had happened to me. Over the course of my 10-year career, I have done questionable things. Manipulated witnesses, exploited legal loopholes, used psychological pressure. But all of this was within the framework of a game, within the boundaries of professional ethics. What I did to Daniel, it was something else entirely. Phone buzzed, unknown number. Mikhail Orloff. Mikhail, this is Daniel. My stomach dropped. Daniel, I need to talk to you, personal. About what? About what happened. About implications. Where? Same hotel bar where we met. Hour. I arrived at the plaza, feeling dread in the pit of my stomach. Daniel was already sitting at the corner table, looking older somehow, more tired. Drink? he suggested as I sat down. Please. He ordered whiskey for both of us. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Congratulations, he said finally. Beautiful victory. Thank you. You must be very proud. Something in his tone alerted me. Daniel, what's this about? About justice? About integrity? About that we are both lost in that courthouse? I don't understand. Don't you? He leaned forward. Let me spell it out for you, Mikhail. What we did was corruption. Pure and simple. We both consenting adults? Bullshit. His voice was sharp. You researched my personal life, identified my vulnerabilities, and exploited them for professional gain. I offered because you created a situation where I felt vulnerable, alone, desperate for human connection. You manipulated my loneliness. I felt cold realization creeping up my spine. What are you saying? I'm saying you showed me how far you'll go to win, and that information is valuable. Valuable how? Well, he smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. What happens when news gets out that brilliant defense attorney Mikhail Orlov wins cases through sexual favors? What happens to your reputation? To your license? Blackmail. It was not a threatening blackmail. You bastard! I'm bastard. You're the only one who started this game. I'm just playing by rules you established. What do you want? Future cooperation. When I call, when I need favor, you deliver. Think of it as an ongoing professional relationship. And if I refuse? Then legal community learns interesting story about how you really win cases. Plus, I have certain recordings. My blood went cold. Recordings? Bathroom stalls in the federal courthouse have amazing acoustics, and I always come prepared for important meetings. Bitch. Fucking bitch. He played me from the beginning. You planned this, all of it. Not exactly, but when opportunity presented itself, well, I'm not alone to waste good leverage. I stared at him, understanding fully what happened. I thought I was manipulating him, but he was manipulating me. He'd researched my desperate need to win, identified my willingness to cross lines, and used it against me. So what now, I asked. Now you go home, enjoy your victory, and wait for my call. Could be next week, could be next year, but when I need favor, I'll remember. Good boy. He stood up, left money on the table. Oh, and Mikhail? Next time you want to play psychological games with someone, make sure you're better at it than they are. Driving home, I felt like the world had shifted under my feet. Victory I'd fought so hard for was poisoned, infected with knowledge that I'd been outmaneuvered from start. Worse, I'd discovered something terrible about myself. When push came to shove, when everything was on the line, I was willing to prostitute myself for victory. That realization was devastating. The following Monday, a new case arrived on my desk. Another impossible situation. Embezzlement charges against prominent politician. Same type of case where traditional methods wouldn't work, where I'd need to find creative solutions. I stared at the documents, knowing that the old me would already be planning a strategy. Look for prosecutors' weaknesses, find ways to gain advantage at any cost. But new me, changed me, couldn't do it. Anna, I called my assistant. Yes? Call politician's office, tell them I'm a fallen case. Sir? But that's a multi-million-dollar fee. I said decline. But why? This is exactly the type of case you specialize in. Because, I replied slowly, I've forgotten how to win honestly. And until I remember, I shouldn't be practicing the law. Next morning, I called State Bar Association. I want to report ethical violation, told the receptionist. Against another attorney? Against myself. Took 3 hours to tell the whole story. About corruption, about sexual favors, about compromising justice for personal gain. Hardest conversation of my life. 6 months later, I was sitting in a small office in Queens, representing petty criminals and traffic violators. My license wasn't revoked. Suspended for a year and heavy probation, lost my Manhattan office, my high-profile clients, my reputation, but I'd won something back, my integrity. Mr. Orlov, said teenage client, can you really help my case? Public defender says I should plead guilty. I looked at charges. Minor drug possession, first offense, kid who made a mistake. Yes, I replied, I can help, and I'll do it honestly. Winning that small case, getting probation instead of jail time for a scared teenager, felt better than any victory I'd achieved in my corporate days. Real victory, I'd learned, isn't about never losing. Real victory is about knowing that your wins don't come at cost my soul. And sometimes, learning a lesson is worth losing everything else. Price of victory, turns out, should never be yourself.